The coaching carousel has finally stopped spinning. This was one of the most eventful coaching cycles in NFL history. You've got Jim Harbaugh making his return to the NFL after winning a national championship, Pete Carroll getting let go for reasons I still don't fully understand, and the greatest coach of all time, Bill Belichick, being fired by the Patriots and not getting a new job. But now that the dust is finally settled and every vacant head coaching job has been filled, we can talk about which teams nailed it and which teams left me scratching my head so hard you'd think I have dandruff. So here's every head coaching hire of 2024, the good, the mid, and the ugly. Let's get into it, starting with the biggest fish in this year's head coaching pond, Jim Harbaugh. After leading the Michigan Wolverines to their first national championship since 1997, Jim is returning to the NFL to continue his pursuit of that elusive Lombardi trophy that he has to see every year at Thanksgiving. After letting go of Brandon Staley, the Chargers were long considered the favorite to sign Harbaugh, and even though he gave them a little scare by interviewing with the Atlanta Falcons twice, Jim ultimately blue-balled the Dirty Birds and settled on Los Angeles. I honestly don't know how you can look at this hire as anything but good, and good is an understatement. This is a home run, slam dunk, hole-in-one, whatever sports term you want to come up with. It's not often a coach becomes available who was certifiably great in the NFL, and the only reason he didn't stay in the NFL was for petty, non-performance related reasons. Basically, the 49ers had gone 8 years without a winning record, and then Harbaugh strolled into the building and said, I don't know why you guys made this look so hard, and went 13-3, 11-4-1, and 12-4 in his first 3 seasons, making the NFC Championship game in each of those 3 years, along with 1 Super Bowl appearance. But in his 4th and final season, a power struggle developed between Harbaugh and GM Trent Baalke. And even though the Niners went just 8-8 that year, rumor was that Harbaugh was going to leave regardless of what happened that season, which he did. Harbaugh later said that he didn't leave the 49ers. The 49er hierarchy left him. And since all of this coincided with the Michigan job opening up, Harbaugh's alma mater, he said, screw this, back to college I go, instead of pursuing another NFL job, meaning one of the most successful NFL coaches of all time would no longer be coaching in the NFL. And if he ever became available again, it would be the most no-brainer hire of all time, which is good because I'm not sure the Chargers have a brain. Harbaugh is a masterful team builder and culture creator, and that's exactly what the Chargers need considering their current culture is to underperform and choke at every possible opportunity. Don't be surprised if he turns this team around faster than you expect. I also heard he might be bringing a pretty high-ranking assistant with him, Carter Scallions or something. But while Harbaugh has some pretty tiny shoes to fill in Los Angeles, there are some massive generic Nikes to fill in New England. So that leaves just one question. How big are Jerod Mayo's feet? Mayo was a very good linebacker for the Patriots from 2008 to 2012, even leading the league in tackles one year before injuries started to derail his career. After retiring in 2015, he was hired as New England's inside linebackers coach in 2019 and has long been considered a potential successor to Bill Belichick. What we didn't know until recently was they put that in writing. Mayo actually had a clause in his contract that tabbed him as the eventual successor to Belichick. And whenever they decided to move on from Bill, this clause would allow them to make Mayo the new head coach very quickly without having to interview anyone else. Now you can look at this 2 ways. On one hand, the Patriots have had a well thought out succession plan in place for a long time, which is more preparation than most teams are able to do when looking for a new head coach. Or you could say that by committing to this plan years in advance, they didn't allow themselves to truly consider any other candidates that might have come available when they let Bill go, like Mike Vrabel or anyone else. I'm gonna call this hire mid for now. I like Jerod, and I like that he's building a staff that feels like his own. It's not just another group of the same Belichick disciples that have rotated jobs in Foxborough forever. But at the same time, it's hard to give this hire a sparkling grade when no one else was even considered. It's not like the Patriots interviewed outside candidates and then decided their guy was best for the job. They kind of just maintain this blind confidence that they've had since putting that clause in his contract. First-time head coaches naturally have a wide range of outcomes, and that's no different for Mayo. Hopefully for Patriots fans, including myself, he follows in DeMeco Ryans' footsteps as another former linebacker who successfully becomes the head coach of his old team. Oh, and speaking of former linebackers, the Raiders have hired Antonio Pierce, Super Bowl winning linebacker for the New York Giants and interim head coach for the 2023 Las Vegas Raiders. And about that interim tag, the Raiders weren't going to make the same mistake twice. In 2021, after firing John Gruden, the Raiders rallied around interim head coach Rich Bisaccia, going 7-5 under his watch and making the playoffs. With an overall record of 10-7, Vegas achieved their second best record since 2002, and they rewarded Bisaccia by hiring Josh McDaniels. Nice. Josh McDaniels was predictably mediocre for 2 seasons before getting fired, so in steps Antonio Pierce, who takes over a 3-5 team and leads them to a respectable 8-9. Remember, this is a team with Aiden O'Connell as its quarterback. With another turnaround led by an interim head coach and Max Crosby threatening to demand a trade if they went with anyone else, the Raiders almost had no choice but to name Antonio Pierce their official head coach. But with that said, I'm gonna go with mid for this hire as well. Antonio Pierce is clearly a player's coach, his guys love him, they went to bat for him through this entire process, and that says a lot. And again, I think based on how things played out after they didn't hire Bisaccia, they almost had no choice but to go with Pierce. Because if they hired another dud coach after their interim coach gave them new life, there might be riots in the streets of Las Vegas. But I'm not gonna grade this any higher because he's still fairly inexperienced. After all, he's only been coaching at the NFL level for 2 years after spending the previous 4 years in college and 4 years before that in high school. The Raiders' turnaround could have been a fluke or the start of something great, but I'm not gonna jump to conclusions either way away based on a 9-game sample size. I will say though, hiring Luke Getsy as the offensive coordinator does not feel like a good first step. Hopefully I'm wrong. But while both Mayo and Pierce are getting their shot, not every team went with a rookie head coach. Like the Atlanta Falcons, who have hired, or rehired, Raheem Morris. Morris has been in the NFL since 2002 when he started as the defensive quality control coach for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and shuffled through multiple roles there for the next 9 years, except for 2006 when he left to be Kansas State's defensive coordinator, only to return to Tampa the following season. Now, for the final 3 years of his Tampa tenure, Morris got his first shot at being a head coach, and it didn't go great. He went 3-13, 10-6, and 4-12 in his 3 seasons before getting fired. And his next head coaching opportunity wouldn't come until 2020 when he took over as interim head coach for Atlanta, where he inherited an 0-5 team that would then go 4-7 under his watch. Not bad, but nothing crazy either. I'm not gonna lie, this hire doesn't excite me. I'm going ugly for this one. Morris is coming off 3 years on the Rams staff as their defensive coordinator, and it seems like anyone that Sean McVay breathes on becomes a successful NFL coach. So maybe Morris has some new tricks up his sleeve these days. But overall, this feels like a consolation hire. Although I will say I do like the move to bring Zach Robinson over as offensive coordinator. Jokes about Sean McVay aside, young, offensive-minded coaches from his tree have a pretty good hit rate. And just to touch on the Belichick side of things, since Atlanta was the only team to interview him and at one point it seemed like he was going to be their guy, I totally understand not pulling the trigger on him. Bringing in Belichick means you bring in his guys, it likely means you give him some level of power in the organization. That's a big change. And honestly, over the last several seasons, he hasn't gotten enough results for it to be worth turning the entire franchise on its head. Alright, back to rookie head coaches because there's a lot. Joining Raheem Morris in the NFC South is Dave Canales, new head coach for the Carolina Panthers. I actually tweeted that I was hoping for this move about 10 days before it happened because it's just such an obvious fit. Canales is the quarterback whisperer. He was the quarterback's coach in Seattle for Geno Smith's incredible revival in 2022, and he was the offensive coordinator this past season in Tampa for the best statistical year of Baker Mayfield's career. Now, obviously Bryce Young's a little different, he's not a veteran or a journeyman, but he is a quarterback that needs some help, and it seems like Canales is the guy for the job. Look, the Panthers have a lot of problems, but the biggest one right now is their #1 overall quarterback not playing well. So bringing in a head coach that is specifically equipped to fix their biggest issue is brilliant, which is why I feel pretty comfortable calling this a good hire. Obviously, I can't predict how a first-time head coach is gonna pan out. No one can. All we can do is look at the logic and process behind each hire. That's why I was more critical of the Mayo and Pierce hires, because I have serious questions about those two things. But to me, the logic here is flawless. Canales has experience, he was with the Seahawks for 12 years, slowly ascending up the coaching ladder, and then he goes to Tampa and proves himself there, as a first-time play caller no less. He has everything you're looking for as far as rookie head coaches go, and that's why the Panthers gave him a 6-year deal. But there is another guy who ticks a lot of the boxes you'd want in a first-time head coach. Mike Macdonald, new head coach of the Seattle Seahawks, and the new youngest head coach in the NFL after Gerard Mayo held the title for about 5 minutes. Now, the trendy thing to do in today's NFL if you're gonna go with a young head coach is to go with someone offensive-minded. Everyone's looking for the next offensive guru. That's why for every Jonathan Gannon that gets hired, there are 3 Shane Steichens or Kevin O'Connells or Mike McDaniels. But in this case, a defensive guy got the call. And not just any defensive guy, the guy in charge of arguably the best defense in the NFL last year. Even though this hire goes against the grain of what most NFL teams are doing these days, I don't think it's a bad move. I mentioned how teams around the league are trying to find the next offensive mastermind to be their head coach. What they're really doing is trying to find the next Sean McVay or Kyle Shanahan. And guess what division those guys coach in? The NFC West. Mike Macdonald's new home. How do you combat 2 of the greatest offensive minds of our generation? Take a gamble on someone that could be one of the best defensive minds of our generation. The Seahawks aren't trying to fight fire with fire. They're trying to fight fire with water. A pretty smart strategy if you ask me, or any fireman. So I'm gonna call this hire good as well. The logic behind it is there, the experience is there. Even though Macdonald is only 36, he's been with the Ravens since 2014, other than a one-off year in 2021 when he was Michigan's defensive coordinator. It all makes sense to me. My only question is why Seattle fired Pete Carroll to begin with. At first they made it seem like he was transitioning to a front office role, and then word came out that he still wants to coach. Just weird vibes all around. Seattle seems to have found a pretty good replacement though, and he's literally half Pete Carroll's age, so whatever. But Pete Carroll wasn't the only firing that caught people by surprise this offseason. The Titans also got rid of Mike Vrabel and replaced him with Bengals offensive coordinator Brian Callahan. Callahan joined the Broncos as an assistant in 2010 and then had stints with the Lions and Raiders as their quarterbacks coach before landing in Cincinnati, where he spent the last 5 years as offensive coordinator. His father is also a very accomplished coach in the NFL. He's been in the league for almost 30 years, is widely considered one of the best offensive line coaches of all time, and will be joining his son Brian in Tennessee as their new offensive line coach. But back to Brian, what do we make of this hire? Obviously, the Bengals offense has been very good over the last few years, but how much of that should we credit to Brian? I mean, the Bengals have great players on the offensive side of the ball to the point that it would be concerning if they weren't scoring a lot. And even though Brian's the offensive coordinator, he doesn't call the plays. Zach Taylor does. Now, I'm not saying Brian doesn't do anything. It's fair to assume he has a heavy hand in game planning, play design, all that stuff. But the fact is, we don't know exactly what he does, so it's hard to get a read on what exactly he brings to the table as a head coach, other than the lines on his resume that say worked with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. choice. I'm going with mid for this one. Look, it's not all bad. He's still a young coach that's had success in his prior role and comes from a football family. His range of outcomes is just as wide as all the other first-time head coaches. And I like that Tennessee is taking a chance on someone new, regardless of their pedigree, instead of going with someone experienced who has proven to be mediocre. Which brings me to Dan Quinn. Commander's gonna commander. This one's ugly, I'm just gonna say that right off the top. I had faith in this team, I really did. I thought under new ownership with Dan Snyder gone that things were gonna be different. Instead, they hired the lowest upside coach on the entire market, whose most recent achievement is allowing his Cowboys defense to give up 48 points to the Packers en route to a first-round playoff exit. Now yes, Dan Quinn's been to a Super Bowl as a head coach, but one, his team blew a 28-3 lead in that Super Bowl, and two, Ron Rivera's been to a Super Bowl too, and we saw how that worked out. This just feels like more of the same. Yeah, Quinn's a good leader and he'll probably bring some short-term stability and improvement to the franchise just because he's a new face and has experience, but I have no faith that this will work out long-term. Quinn has a 46-44 career record as a head coach. We know what he is. Now, reportedly, Washington was targeting Ben Johnson as their new head coach before he took himself out of consideration pretty late in the game, and the sentiment around the league is that the Commanders got screwed, which I don't understand. Even if Johnson took too long to decide he didn't want the job, he's under no obligation to accept it. It sucks for Washington that they ultimately wasted so much time pursuing someone they didn't end up landing, but it's their fault they didn't have a fallback option. Or even worse, they did have a fallback option and it was Dan Quinn. Either way, cry me a river. Stuff like this is why bad teams stay bad. But there you have it. Let me know in the comments which hires you guys are excited for and which ones you think are destined to go up in flames. And of course, be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already and ring that little bell so you never miss an upload. As always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.